My name is Thea Owens, and I'm 34 years old. Last Christmas Eve, my mother slid a gift-wrapped box across her dining room table, tapped the ribbon twice, and told me it was my future. And inside that box was a contract to become my sister's assistant for $52,000 a year. My parents had planned that moment for weeks. My sister smiled through every second of it. Not one person at that table knew I own a company worth $1.5 billion. They believed I was a broke bookstore girl who needed rescuing, and I let them believe it, because I wanted to see exactly how my family treats someone they think has nothing. By the end of that night, my sister was on the kitchen floor crying, and it had nothing to do with anything I own. But here's what none of them knew when I walked through that door. The box with my name on it was the smallest surprise in that house. Welcome back to Calm Drama Stories, where quiet women tell the stories nobody saw coming. Stories about family, betrayal, and the moment everything finally changes. If you've ever been underestimated at your own family's table, this story is for you. Drop a comment below, tell me where you're listening from, and be sure to subscribe, because you won't want to miss what happened when I finally stopped hiding. Let me show you a normal Tuesday, 3 days before that dinner. At 10 in the morning, I was on my knees in the children's section of Dogwood Lane books, shelving picture books and listening to Mrs. Kowalski explain her grandson's dinosaur phase. My store sits on Main Street in Maple Falls, Ohio, in a brick building with drafty windows and a radiator that clanks like an old man clearing his throat. I've run it for 9 years. The whole town knows me as the quiet Owens girl who sells paperbacks and drives a 12-year-old Honda. I drive that Honda because I like it. Try explaining that at my mother's table. Here's the part the town can't see. At 4 that afternoon, I climbed the back stairs to my apartment above the store, opened my laptop, and approved the acquisition of a regional freight company for $40 million. One electronic signature. Then I went back downstairs and helped a 9-year-old find a book about volcanoes. That's my life. I founded Larkspur Holdings 10 years ago. We move products for half the retail chains in the Midwest: software, warehouses, trucks, the invisible machinery under everything you order online. Our last private funding round valued the company at $1.5 billion. I own 60%. Outside a handful of lawyers and bankers bound to silence, exactly 2 people knew my name was attached to any of it. My chief operating officer, Dana Whitfield, who runs the public side, and my grandmother Pearl, who knew I did well, and never once asked for a number. My parents believed I was 1 bad month away from asking them for rent money. I had never corrected them. You'll understand why in a minute, because that Tuesday, while I was still smelling like paperback glue, my mother called. My mother's phone voice has 2 settings, honey and scalpel, and she can switch between them mid-sentence. Thea, sweetheart, Christmas Eve, our house, 6 o'clock. We're celebrating your sister. I said that sounded nice, and asked what we were celebrating. The pause she took was pure theater. Madison has been named Chief Executive Officer of Brightline Home, $600,000 a year, Thea, a CEO, in this family. She let the number breathe, the way some people let wine breathe. Then the scalpel came out. So smooth I almost admired it. And there's something important we want to discuss with you, too. About your future. You're 34, honey. The bookstore was sweet for a while, but sweet doesn't pay for retirement, does it? I looked out my window at the snow starting over Main Street and said I'd be there. Wear something nice, she said. Gerald Hartman may stop by. He's the chairman of Madison's board. Very important man. Please don't talk about books all night. Then her voice softened into the sentence I have heard my entire adult life, the one she truly believes is love. We just want you to be somebody, Thea. She hung up before I could answer, which was fine, because in 11 years I had never found an answer she could hear. I stood there holding the phone, a woman who had signed a $40 million deal that afternoon, being told to wear something nice so I wouldn't embarrass the family in front of an important man. Here's the thing you need to know about me, though. I wasn't angry yet. Anger takes hope, and mine had a scar where the hope used to be. To show you the scar, I have to take you back 11 years. I was 23, and I had just watched my first company die. It was a small furniture delivery startup, 2 leased vans, a scheduling app I built at my kitchen table, and 14 months of 18-hour days. A national chain moved into our market, undercut every quote I had, and I lost the vans, my savings, and most of my hearing for the word entrepreneur. I came home that Thanksgiving hollowed out, looking for a couch and some stuffing, and maybe one person to say, "You tried something hard." Instead, I got a family meeting. My mother had arranged the living room like a tribunal, me on the low ottoman, everyone else above me on the good furniture, aunts and uncles included, because in my family shame is a spectator sport. She had actually made notes. She went through my failure line by line, the loan, the lease I'd broken, the boyfriend who left, the weight I'd gained. Well, my father studied his hands, and my sister Madison, 26 then and already a district manager, said nothing at all. I remember the gravy going cold on the table behind them while my mother built to her big finish. She leaned forward, took both my hands like she was doing me a kindness, and said, "Dreams are for people who can afford them, sweetheart." Everyone nodded. My uncle actually said amen. I spent that night washing dishes so nobody would see my face, and somewhere between the roasting pan and the pie plates, something in me went very quiet and very cold. They would never see me try again. They would never see me, period. If my dreams were a luxury item, fine. I would build them somewhere my family couldn't window shop. Here's what nobody tells you about secrecy. It starts as a bandage and hardens into armor, and one day, you realize you've built a fortress and moved in. I took a night shift job managing a distribution warehouse outside Columbus. I learned freight the way you learn a language, by being surrounded and slightly drowning. At 24, I wrote routing software in the break room that cut our dead miles by a fifth, and instead of selling it, I kept it, quit, and started Larkspur with one client and a laptop. Growth was slow, then sudden, the way ice cracks. We bought a struggling warehouse operator in year 3, 2 trucking firms in year 5. By year 7, the e-commerce wave was lifting everything we'd bolted together, and the trade papers started writing about Larkspur's mysterious ownership because I had structured everything through layered holding companies out of Delaware. Dana Whitfield, my chief operating officer, became the public face. The interviews, the conference keynotes, the handshakes. One trade reporter nicknamed the majority owner the Ghost. I liked the Ghost. The Ghost never sat on an ottoman. My rule was simple, and I want you to hear it, because it's the closest thing I have to a confession. Information is inventory. I never let anyone see the warehouse. Not my parents, not old friends, not the men I dated, who all eventually left the way you'd leave a house where half the doors are locked. The first thing I ever bought with real money was the brick building on Main Street, and I put a bookstore in it, because a bookstore is the one business nobody in my family would ever envy. In 10 years, exactly one outsider ever saw my face in a Larkspur room. Remember that. He matters later. 2 days before Christmas Eve, at 9:40 in the evening, my phone lit up with a group text from my mother. The group was named Christmas Eve Plan, and I can only assume she built it in a hurry, because there was one member she had forgotten to remove. Me. The messages came in a cheerful little burst. First, the menu. Then the seating chart, which put me between my mother and Madison's husband Cole, which should have been my first clue, because you seat a flight risk between 2 guards. Then this, from my mother, verbatim, with the little heart emoji she uses like punctuation. Frank will read the letter after dessert. Madison presents the offer. Don't bring up the assistant job until after the toast. Let her have a nice dinner first. And then, 30 seconds later, the message I have read more times than I will ever admit. Nobody tells Thea it's an intervention. She'll run. I sat on the edge of my bed and watched 3 little dots appear and disappear. Madison had seen it. Cole had seen it. My father, presumably, was in the room while it was typed. Not one of them wrote, "Wait, she's in this group." Not one of them wrote, "Maybe we shouldn't ambush her at Christmas." The dots just stopped, and the thread went quiet, and I understood that the dinner was scripted, rehearsed, and cast, with me in the role of the problem. A letter, an offer, a toast first, so the ambush would land on a full stomach. I put the phone face down on the quilt and stared at my ceiling for a long time. And here is the part I'm not proud of. Somewhere under the hurt, cold, and patient as a ledger, an idea sat up. That night brought no tears and no shouting, because by then I'd had 11 years of practice at neither. What I did was make a decision that I would spend the next week telling myself was research. They believed I was broke, naive, and running out of chances. Fine. I would walk into that dinner as exactly the woman they'd invented. Thrift store coat, the Honda, wide eyes, no defenses, and I would watch, closely and finally, how my family treats a person they believe has nothing to offer them. Every condescending smile would be a data point. Every seating chart and scripted toast would go in the file. And when the night was over, I would tally it up like a year-end audit and decide, once and for all, how much of my life these people deserved. You can call that a test. My grandmother would later call it something sharper, and she'd be right. But I'm telling this story in order. I made preparations. Because I'm me. I told Dana I'd have my phone on me and asked her to hold anything urgent unless it truly couldn't wait. I decided I'd drive myself, park facing the street, and keep my coat near the door. An exit plan, the kind you make for buildings you expect to catch fire. Then, on the morning of the 23rd, my grandmother Pearl called the store. She's 86, she still drives her ancient Buick to bingo, and she does not make phone calls to chat. "You're coming tomorrow night?" she asked. I said yes. There was a pause with weight in it. "Good," she said. "I need you there, Thea Jean." She hung up before I could ask why. My grandmother has never once needed me at a dinner. That afternoon, the 23rd of December, Dana sent me a file marked urgent after all, and I want you to appreciate the timing, because I've had a year to appreciate it and I'm still not done. It was a client review. Brightline Home, a regional home goods retailer, 80-some stores, one of Larkspur's 10 biggest accounts. We ran their entire fulfillment operation, every warehouse and every truck, and they were bleeding on us. Invoices sliding past 90 days, 2/4 of missed volume commitments. Our analysts recommended terminating the contract at the end of January, which for a retailer coming out of the holidays is not a haircut. It's a heart attack. I read the summary twice, flagged my concerns, and was typing my approval when I reached the paragraph about Brightline's leadership shakeup and the name of the brand new chief executive they'd hired 3 weeks earlier to steady the ship. Madison Owens Clark. I sat back and looked at that sentence for a long time. My sister's $600,000 triumph, the crown jewel of tomorrow's dinner, was the top job at a company my own analysts had just described, in writing, as circling the drain. She didn't know I existed anywhere near her world. She didn't know her biggest vendor was deciding her company's future at a bookstore in Maple Falls. I typed one instruction to Dana. Hold the termination decision until after the holidays. No explanation. She didn't ask for one. That's why it's Dana. I told myself it was diligence, not mercy. Then I closed the laptop, wrapped my grandmother's Christmas present, and laid out the oldest coat I own. The next evening, I parked my Honda behind a line of cars worth more than my parents' house and walked in to be humiliated on schedule. My parents' house on Christmas Eve looked like a catalog had detonated. Garland on every banister, a 9-foot tree, and a hired kid in a black apron taking coats, which told me my mother had an audience in mind before she'd invited a single guest. She met me at the door, kissed the air near my cheek, and did the full elevator scan: coat, boots, bare nails. "Oh, Thea," she sighed in the voice other people use for flat tires. "You could have made an effort. Well, come in before the neighbors see." The dining table was set for 14, and at each place sat a little cream card with a name in calligraphy, and under most of the names, a title. Madison Owens Clark, Chief Executive Officer. Cole Clark, Regional Sales Director. My cousin's card said registered nurse. My father's said Frank Owens, head of the family, which would have been funny if any part of it were true. Mine said Thea. Just Thea. Floating there in all that cardstock white, like the printer had run out of ideas. I was still looking at it when I felt someone looking at me. By the fireplace stood a man I'd never met at any family event. Silver hair, golf tan, the practiced lean of someone who chairs things. My mother materialized at my elbow, glowing. "That's Gerald Hartman, chairman of Madison's board. He squeezed us in on Christmas Eve. Isn't that marvelous?" It was marvelous. It was also, though my mother couldn't have known it, the single most dangerous thing she had ever done to me, because Gerald Hartman was looking at me the way you look at a word on the tip of your tongue, and I had seen him before, across a lawyer's conference table in Chicago. I had come to play the naive broke girl, and my family made it effortless, because no one checks a costume they design themselves. During cocktail hour, I asked Cole what quarterly numbers meant, and watched him grow 2 inches. I let my mother explain the word portfolio to me, slowly, with hand gestures, while her friends from the neighborhood exchanged glances soft with pity. My Aunt Carol asked if I was still doing the little book thing, and when I said yes, she squeezed my arm the way you'd comfort the recently diagnosed. Twice I said I'd been thinking about picking up extra shifts somewhere, just to watch the sentence travel around the room like a canapé. Everyone took a piece. Nobody asked a follow-up question. Not what I loved about the store, not whether I was happy, not one single question about my actual life. That was the first data point that genuinely stung, and I want to be honest about that. I had walked in braced for cruelty, and what I got was worse. I got dismissal. Warm and total. The kind you don't argue with because it smiles at you while it erases you. My father hugged me hello, said it was good to see me, and then didn't address another word to me for 40 minutes, because my father goes wherever my mother's weather goes. Only Hartman kept drifting back into my sightline, swirling his scotch, studying me in polite little sips. I gave him my sweetest bookstore girl smile and complimented the shrimp. Then my mother clinked a glass with her ring, the room hushed like a theater, and she announced, "Before dinner, we have a little family tradition." We have no such tradition. But that night we did, because that night had a script. My mother stood at the head of the table with a piece of paper she pretended not to need, and delivered what she called a little review of our family's year. It was a shareholder report, where the only stock was Madison. She walked us through my sister's promotion like Stations of the Cross, the interviews, the negotiation, the corner office with a river view. And when she arrived at the number, she slowed down and gave every syllable its own spotlight. $600,000 a year. The room applauded. Cole whistled. My uncle said, "Now that's a return on investment," and clapped my father on the shoulder. And my father beamed the borrowed beam of a man applauding someone else's weather. Madison stood there in the wash of it, lovely and lacquered, and I clapped too. Honestly, I did. Because whatever else is true, my sister works like a rented mule and always has. Then my mother turned to me, and the room's temperature moved with her eyes. "And Thea," she said, consulting her paper as if my life required notes, "is still with her little bookstore." A beat, perfectly timed. We keep hoping? The laughter was quiet and terrible, the kind people offer up when they're grateful the spotlight found someone else. I smiled and raised my glass of eggnog to her, one broke girl saluting the fleet. Inside, the ledger got a fresh line. But here's what I noticed while the room chuckled at me, and it's the detail that kept me from enjoying my own experiment. Gerald Hartman wasn't laughing. He was looking from Madison to me and back, with the stalled expression of a man doing arithmetic that won't come out even. He'd heard the words, "her little bookstore," and something about them was bothering him. The doorbell rang in the middle of the applause, and my grandmother Pearl blew in with the cold. 86 years old, 5 feet of wool coat and opinions, fresh from piloting her Buick across town like a tugboat captain. The room rearranged itself around her the way rooms do around people who can't be managed. She hugged Madison and said congratulations like she meant it. Then she found me, and she held on an extra moment. And into my ear, so quietly I nearly missed it, she said, "Stay close tonight." Before I could answer, she was already moving toward her chair, which my mother had placed, I noted, at the far end, past the cousins, in the seat you give a child or a problem. My mother caught the thread of her own show again. "Mother Pearl, we were just toasting Madison, 600,000 a year. Can you imagine?" My grandmother settled into her chair, unfolded her napkin with the crisp snap of a woman who has buried a husband and 2 business partners and said, "Money is loud, worth is quiet." The table did the polite chuckle it does when it can't tell whether it's been blessed or slapped. My mother's smile tightened by one turn of the screw. "Well," she said, "tonight we're allowed a little noise." And she moved us toward the dining room before the old woman could reload. I helped Pearl with her chair, and her hand found my wrist under the table's edge, and she gave it a squeeze that wasn't affection. It was a signal. The grip you use before a wave hits. My grandmother knew something about tonight that I didn't. Between her warning and Hartman's stare, my simple experiment was suddenly running on a crowded track. Before we sat, Hartman finally made his move, cornering me by the drinks cart with the gentle inevitability of a man who has run 1,000 meetings. "So, Thea, the bookstore sister." He said it pleasantly, but his eyes were still doing arithmetic. He small-talked me through retail, supply chains, fascinating times in logistics, watching my face the whole while, and then he set the hook with the ease of long practice. "Brightline works with an outfit called Larkspur, runs our entire backbone. You'd never guess who owns it. Nobody knows. Trade press calls the owner a ghost." I asked, wide-eyed, if a company could really be owned by a ghost, and he laughed. But the laugh didn't reach the arithmetic. I was in a room in Chicago once, 2 years ago. Lawyers everywhere. The ghost came for 10 minutes. Never said a word. The whole room just waited on a nod. He leaned in an inch. "Funny thing. You remind me of someone I saw there." The pause he left was a door held open. I stood in that pause, holding my eggnog, 30 seconds from having 10 years of careful architecture pulled down at my mother's drinks cart, and I did the hardest easy thing in the world. I giggled. Me? I sell picture books to third graders, but I'll tell my customers a ghost story about billionaires, they'll love it. His face did something complicated, and then my mother swept him away to see the tree, and I breathed. If you've ever been introduced by your job title, or by the lack of one, you know exactly how that room felt all night. Tell me in the comments what your family calls you at their table, and if someone forwarded you this story, hit subscribe before dinner's served here. Because this dinner was about to go somewhere none of them had planned, including me. They sent me to the kitchen for the mashed potatoes. Of course they did. Every ambush needs its errands. And that's when I saw it. Under the tree, set apart from the ordinary presents the way a reliquary sits apart from luggage, was a box wrapped in cream paper with a wide red ribbon, and on the tag, in my mother's careful hand, to Thea, your future. Love, Mom and Dad. I stood in the hallway holding a bowl of potatoes and read that tag 3 times. Your future. Gift wrapped. Under a tree. Through the kitchen doorway I could hear my mother and Madison, voices low and efficient, running the schedule like producers before a broadcast. After dessert, your father reads the letter. Then Madison. You present the offer. Warm. Big sister. Not boss. Then she opens the box. A pause. A clink of serving spoons. Then my mother's voice dropped into a register I recognized from 11 years ago. The tribunal register. Calm and certain and utterly without malice, which is what makes it unsurvivable. Do not let her answer until everyone's watching. She won't make a scene in front of guests. She never does. And Madison, my sister, the celebrated executive, the woman I had just applauded, said, I know. That's what I'm counting on. I carried the potatoes to the table and set them down without spilling a drop, and if you had seen me, you'd have seen a drab woman in an old sweater doing an errand. You would not have seen what I was actually doing, which was standing very still inside myself, watching the last soft thing I felt for that dinner party quietly close its doors. Humiliating me hadn't been an impulse. They had rehearsed it. The box sat under the tree through the whole meal, patient as a verdict. Dinner was long and glittering, and I remember almost none of it, because all of it was preamble. When the pie plates were cleared, my mother touched my father's sleeve, and Frank Owens rose with a folded sheet of paper and the expression of a man sent to do weather in a war zone. Thea, he read, and his voice shook, because whatever else my father is, he is not a natural executioner. You're 34 years old, we love you, and it breaks our hearts watching you waste yourself. The letter went on. My mother's sentences in my father's mouth, every clause polished. The bookstore was called Your Hiding Place. My Honda made an appearance. So did my empty ring finger to a sympathetic murmur from the aunts. I sat with my hands folded and took it, data point after data point, while around the table every face arranged itself into troubled compassion, which from the inside looks exactly like an audience. Then my mother stood, because the headliner never lets the opening act close. Sweetheart, we didn't want another year of this, so we did something about it. She said it with her chin high, a woman being brave on my behalf. We just want you to be somebody. There it was. The family motto, laid on me like a wreath. She nodded, and Madison went to the tree and came back with the cream and ribbon box and set it in front of me. Inside, on bright line letterhead, lay an employment agreement. Executive assistant to the chief executive officer. Salary, $52,000. Start date, January 2nd. Reporting directly to Madison Owens Clark. My sister leaned down beside me, warm as a heat lamp, and said the sentence she had rehearsed in the kitchen. You don't have to be great, Thea. You just have to be near it. I was still looking at the contract. At the tidy signature line with my name printed under it, at $52,000 offered to me like a life raft, while my own company moved more than that every 4 seconds of every business day. When my mother, flushed with momentum, decided the night could hold one more announcement. And since we're all together, she said, there's a family decision about Grandma Pearl. I watched my grandmother's chin come up slowly at the far end of the table. We've spoken with a realtor friend of mine. In January, we're listing the Chestnut Street house. Mother Pearl will move to Silver Meadows. They have a waiting list. But I pulled strings. She said pulled strings the way other people say performed surgery. The house money will set her up beautifully, and honestly, that old place needs a family, not a widow rattling around in it. Pearl said evenly. I wasn't aware I'd asked. My mother laughed the laugh she uses to pave over other people. Mother, be realistic. Who's going to keep that house? Not Thea. And here she turned to me, smiling, including me, and delivered it without a gram of cruelty in her voice. Which is the thing about my mother I have never been able to explain to anyone. Honey, you couldn't buy the garage? The table chuckled. Cole toasted new chapters. And I looked down the long white tablecloth at my grandmother, the one person in that family who had ever kept my secret without asking to see the vault, sitting in the far chair, being liquidated by committee between the pie and the coffee, and I understood, finally and completely, why she had needed me there tonight. My experiment was over. Something else had started. What happened next happened the way pressure always happens in my family, softly, from every direction at once, with love as the stated reason. My mother produced a pen, not offered it, produced it, laid it across the contract at the perfect angle, a stage manager's touch. Sign it tonight, sweetheart, start the new year new. Cole talked about growth mindset. My aunt said opportunities like this don't knock twice, dear, not at your age. My uncle observed to no one and everyone that some people need the nest kicked or they never fly, and the table murmured its amen, the same amen from 11 years ago, aged like a bad wine. And Madison crouched next to my chair. Actually crouched, the posture you take with toddlers and skittish dogs, and made her closing argument with her eyes shining, and I truly believe she meant every word as kindness, which is the horror of it. Thea, I know it feels small, but I'll be right there. I can teach you everything. How to dress, how to talk to serious people, how to be in rooms like mine. Rooms like hers. I thought about the room in Chicago with the lawyers, where nobody talks until the quiet woman by the window nods. I looked at the pen lying on the contract. 3 days earlier, with a different pen, on a different line, I had signed away $40 million and gone downstairs to find a book about volcanoes. My whole family leaned in, waiting to watch the failure finally accept the rescue. And then, for the third time that evening, Gerald Hartman's phone went off in his jacket. And this time, when he read the screen, the chairman of Brightline's board went the color of the tablecloth. I asked for a moment to think, which the table graciously granted. The condemned always gets a cigarette. And stepped onto the back porch with my phone and called Dana, who answered on the first ring, which meant it was bad. I was about to text you, she said. Brightline's board is meeting tonight, Christmas Eve, emergency session. Somebody over there got wind we're preparing to terminate. I watched my breath fog in the porch light and asked what they were planning. Damage control, but with other people's money. They're accelerating the new CEO's commitment package. They want it signed December 26th, so they can announce leadership stability before the news about us leaks. I knew what a commitment package meant at a company like that, but I asked anyway, because I needed to hear it out loud. Equity buy-in, Dana said. The new CEO purchases stock personally, $340,000. Standard skin in the game, except the game is over. That money's a sandbag against a flood, Thea. It buys them maybe a quarter. Through the kitchen window, I could see my sister laughing at something, her head tipped back, the Riverview executive at the top of her year. Her board was about to let her pour her savings into a hull they knew was cracked, while her own vendor, me, stood on the porch deciding whether to pull the last pin. If we terminate, they fold by spring, Dana said, level as always. If we stay quiet, your sister buys the iceberg. What do you want to do? Snow had started, small and dry. Inside, my mother was refilling Hartman's glass and glancing toward the porch, wondering what was keeping the guest of dishonor. Nothing yet, I told Dana. Keep your phone on. Then I went back inside, where it turned out the night was not done cornering me. Hartman intercepted me in the hallway between the kitchen and the dining room, one hand light on my elbow, all avuncular charm with nothing behind the eyes but calculation. Borrow you for 1 minute? Frank's study. Won't take long. A chairman doesn't ask. He schedules. I let him steer me into my father's little den. Golf trophies, a desk nobody writes at, the smell of carpet and old certainty. And he shut the door with a click that rearranged the evening. No preamble this time. The charm came off like a coat. Chicago, he said. 2 years ago, September. 30th floor, Wexler and Roth. A financing meeting for an acquisition your side was making. Present were 4 attorneys, 2 bankers, your COO Whitfield. He ticked them off on his fingers, watching me. And a woman who came in late, sat in the 3rd chair from the window, and never said a thing. And when the terms changed at the 11th hour, every person in that room, including 2 managing partners billing $1,000 an hour, stopped talking and looked at her. And waited. She nodded once, and $60 million moved. He took a step closer, lowering his voice as though the golf trophies might testify. I was there representing the seller, Miss Owens. I've spent 2 years wondering who that woman was. Then tonight I walk into a Christmas party in Maple Falls, Ohio, and she's sitting across from me being lectured about a bookstore. The furnace hummed. Down the hall, faintly, my mother laughed at her own joke. Hartman spread his hands, almost gently, like a man laying down a winning card he wished were smaller. So, before I say anything to anyone, tell me I'm wrong. And that, right there, was the last exit on the highway. I want to be honest with you about that moment because it's the hinge the rest of my life turned on. I could have lied. I had 10 years of practice, a face built for it, and a cover story so boring it defended itself. A laugh, a shrug. You got me, I snuck into a skyscraper. And Hartman would have doubted his own memory by midnight, because rich men would always rather doubt a memory than believe a woman in an old sweater outranks them. The fortress would have held. Nobody would ever have known. And I stood in my father's study, in the house where I learned to hide, and I heard my grandmother's voice from the head of my own memory. Stay close tonight. And I was so tired. Tired in my teeth. Tired of being a ghost at every table I built and every table I was born to. So I said it. Third chair from the window. 2 beats of silence. Then Gerald Hartman aged and lightened at the same time, a man watching a lottery ticket and a subpoena arrive in the same envelope. My God, he said, you're the ghost. What he did next told me everything about him and about the world my mother worships, because he didn't apologize for the evening he'd just watched them put me through. He negotiated. Voice down, hands open, the pivot so fast it whistled. Extend the contract, he murmured. Give Brightline air through the second quarter, and there's no reason anyone ever needs to hear about tonight's unpleasantness. No reason, either, to trouble anyone over the details of the commitment package. The buy-in shores up the bridge, he said, actually saying it out loud, and your sister gets to keep her big job. Everybody wins. There it was, offered to me like a mint on a pillow. My secret, my sister's savings, and his sinking ship, all tied with one ribbon. I looked at him for a long moment. Enjoy dinner, Gerald, I said, and walked out of the study, and my old life stayed behind in it. I didn't go back to the table. I went out the back door into the cold, no coat, because I needed air that no one in that house had breathed yet, and found the porch already occupied. Pearl sat on the old glider in her wool coat, mittened hands around a mug of tea gone cold, looking at the snow like it owed her money. I sat down next to her. For a while neither of us said anything, which with my grandmother is a complete conversation. Then she said, They got to the house yet? Or just the part where they save you from yourself? I told her both, and she nodded, unsurprised. She'd smelled the whole agenda days ago, which was why she'd summoned me. Her backup. Her one ally in a family of auctioneers. I almost told her everything right then. Larkspur, Chicago, the man in the study. But she spoke first. You know what your problem is, Thea Jean? It wasn't a question. Same as your mother's, turned inside out. She needs the whole world to see her worth. You need to make sure nobody ever does. The glider creaked. Snow ticked against the gutter. You've been running a test on this family for 10 years, child. Sitting there in your old coat, keeping score. She turned and looked at me then, 86 years of her, eyes like water under ice. Nobody passes a test they don't know they're taking. I opened my mouth to defend myself, to explain about Thanksgiving, the Ottoman, the Amen, and found the cupboard bare. She patted my knee with a mitten. Money is loud, she said, softer now. Worth is quiet. But quiet and hidden aren't the same thing, and you've been calling one the other for a long time. Inside, the piano started. My mother was gathering her audience again. By the time I came in from the porch, Hartman had performed triage on his own panic. He stood by the piano with a fresh drink and a chairman's smile, and as I entered he raised his glass and announced to the room, A little bird tells me Brightline has very exciting news coming with our partner Larkspur in the new year. He said it looking at me, a message, a lure, a leash, all three. My mother, who wouldn't know Larkspur from a garden center but knows the word partner in a rich man's mouth, inflated on the spot. You hear that, everyone? Madison's company, partnering. And then, because momentum is my mother's one true faith, she swung it all back around to me, which makes tonight perfect. Thea, the pen's still warm, sweetheart. The contract had migrated to the piano lid, ribbon and all, and the pen lay across it. Sign it here, with everyone we love as witnesses. Give your father his Christmas present. The whole table again, plus one chairman watching with acute personal interest whether the ghost of Larkspur was about to become his CEO's errand girl. My father wouldn't meet my eyes. Madison nodded encouragement at me, radiant, oblivious. 2 days from wiring $340,000 onto a sinking ship at the direction of the man refilling his glass by the tree. "We just want you to be somebody," my mother said, for the third time in my life that day, and held out the pen. If you've ever stood at a family gathering while everyone you're related to waited for you to shrink to fit the box they wrapped for you, put it in the comments. I read everyone. And I believe you. And stay with me, because what I did in the next 10 minutes is the reason this story exists. I looked at the pen. And then I asked my mother, politely, if I could say something first. But before the room could get its show, Madison, reading my face, mistaking what she saw there for stage fright, laughed her hostess laugh and said, "Give us 2 minutes, everyone," and steered me into the kitchen by the wrist, sister style, the way she used to pull me out of church. The door swung shut on the party, and then my sister, chief executive officer, $600,000 a year, sagged against the counter like a puppet with the hand withdrawn, and for the first time in probably 15 years I saw the actual Madison, the one under the lacquer. "Please just sign it," she said, and her voice was thin wire. "I know it's beneath you. I know Mom's being... Mom. But if you're settled, she'll finally stand down. You have no idea what it's like being the one she stopped herself, but the sentence finished itself in my head. Being the one she aims at the sky instead of the ground. She rubbed her eyes, careless of the makeup, and the next part came out in pieces. 3 weeks into the job, and the numbers were fog. Every report, management adjusted. Finance kept rescheduling her briefings. And now there's this faith package the board needs signed by the 26th. CEO buys in personally, shows the market confidence. She tried to laugh. "It's my savings. My whole 401k. Cole doesn't even know all of it yet. But Gerald says it's standard and he's been doing this 30 years, so..." She looked up at me, my big sister, drowning in front of me in a kitchen that smelled like pie, and what she asked for broke something in me cleanly, because she didn't ask for help. She had no idea help was standing in front of her. She asked, "Just take the job, Thea, so Mom relaxes, so one of us gets to breathe." That's when I finally understood the family arithmetic. They hadn't built a ladder for her and a cage for me. They'd built 2 cages, and gold-plated one. I stood in my mother's kitchen holding my sister's secret, and my options laid themselves out side by side, tidy as year-end statements, because that is how my mind works even when my chest hurts. Option 1. Stay hidden. Walk out, drive home, let Larkspur's termination proceed in January like the analysts wanted, cut this family off, and keep the answer my test had already delivered. They treat a woman they think is poor like a burden to be managed. End of report. The fortress survives. Madison signs on the 26th and loses everything, and technically none of it would be my doing, and I could tell myself that for the rest of my life at the rate of about once an hour. Option 2. Spend it. Spend the secret I had guarded for 10 years, the ghost that kept me safe. The last clean answer I would ever get to the question of whether my family could love me small. Spend all of it, here, tonight, in front of the aunts and the Amen chorus and the chairman, to save the sister who had just asked me to be her assistant. Pearl's voice sat in the middle of the ledger like a paperweight. Nobody passes a test they don't know they're taking. For 10 years, the safest room in my life was the one where nobody knew me. Standing in that kitchen, I finally did the math on what the rent had been. I took my sister's hand off my wrist, gently, the way you take a glass from someone before news. Then I walked back through the swinging door into the dining room, past the piano, to the head of the table, and I did not pick up the pen. I said, "Madison, one question, before anybody signs anything in this family tonight." The room went curious and quiet. My sister came through the door behind me, puzzled. "Has anyone shown you Brightline's aging report? The real one? Not the management version?" Across the room, Gerald Hartman set down his glass so fast it cracked against the piano lid. "Thea," my mother hissed, "sit down." But I stayed on my feet, and I kept my voice at exactly the pitch I use for storytime, because nothing unsettles loud people like calm. "Receivables running past 90 days?" I said to Madison, only to Madison. 2 straight quarters of missed volume commitments to your biggest logistics vendor. Warehouse inventory stacked 2 seasons deep because sell-through collapsed in the fall. And a credit line that's fully drawn. Which is why, 3 weeks after hiring you, your board suddenly needs its brand new CEO to write a personal check for $340,000 and call it confidence. The words landed on the table like dropped silverware. Cole snorted. Where's this coming from, Facebook? My aunt murmured something about jealousy, at last, as though a diagnosis had been confirmed. My mother stood up, actually wringing the napkin. Thea Owens, your sister runs a company. You sell paperbacks. Apologize. I didn't move, because I was watching the only person in that room whose opinion of my information mattered, and Gerald Hartman had gone the gray of wet newspaper. He tried twice to laugh it off. Colorful theories, holidays, emotions. And both times the laugh died in the air, because the room had seen his face in the second before he built it back. And the room, whatever else it was not stupid. Madison looked from him to me and back, and I watched 3 weeks of fog condense into one droplet of ice-cold understanding. The aging report? She said slowly. To Hartman? Not to me. I asked finance for receivables detail twice. Twice, Gerald. I got summaries. Her voice didn't rise. It lowered, and for one strange proud second she sounded like Pearl. Why does my sister know my numbers? And there it was. The question. Arrived at last, standing in the middle of my mother's Christmas like a stranger no one had invited. Every face at that table turned to me. I took one breath. 10 years long. Because Larkspur is mine, I said. One sentence, and the room stopped like a pulled plug. I founded it 10 years ago. I own 60% of it. My company runs every warehouse and every truck Brightline has, and my analysts have spent 3 weeks deciding whether to cut your company loose, Madison. That's why I know your numbers. They cross my desk before they cross yours. Silence has a sound. It's the ice shifting in 14 abandoned glasses. My mother laughed. I want you to understand. She genuinely laughed, a bright social peal, and looked around the table, inviting everyone to join, because the sentence I had said could not be parked anywhere in the universe she lived in. Thea, sweetheart, Larkspur that's $1 billion company. Gerald, tell her. She turned to him, still smiling, holding out the moment like a plate that needed taking. And Gerald Hartman looked at me. One long look, the study, Chicago, the whole arithmetic finally balancing, and said the only word he had left. Chicago. Then he sat down, carefully, like a man minding a bad back, and put his drink on the floor beside his chair. My mother's smile stayed up a full 3 seconds after everything behind it had gone. I watched it happen, and I want to be honest with you the way I promised at the start. Watching it, I felt no triumph at all. I felt the floor of 10 years drop out because her face went from scorn to shock, and then, this is the part that cost me, to calculation, to recount. I watched my own mother begin to reappraise me in real time, the way her realtor eyes reappraised a house when the neighborhood came up, and I understood with perfect clarity the price of the thing I had just spent. I would never again know which version of her love was for me and which was for the number. That answer had been the whole point of my test, and it burned down with the fortress, all in one sentence. Pearl's mug clicked softly onto the side table. My father whispered my name like a fact he was checking, and I turned to my mother and finished it quietly. You told me dreams are for people who can afford them. I could afford mine, Mom. You just never asked. My mother recovered the way weather recovers. Total. Immediate. Shameless. 10 seconds of dead air, and then the tears arrived, right on schedule, and she came around the table with both arms rising like a drawbridge in reverse. My daughter. My brilliant, secretive girl, I always knew. I always said you had something, didn't I, Frank? Didn't I always? I stepped back. One step, small and complete, and it stopped her mid-reach. No, I said, and there was no anger in it, which is, I think, why it worked. You don't get to be proud of me tonight. An hour ago, I was your failure. You wrapped my rescue in ribbon and rehearsed my ambush in the kitchen. The only thing that's changed since then is a number. Her mouth opened. I said the rest before it could deploy. I was always somebody, Mom. You were waiting for a number. My aunt studied the tablecloth. Cole put down his phone, and I picked up the contract. My future, in its cream and ribbon coffin, folded it neatly along its original crease, and set it beside my plate, squared to the table edge, the way you return something borrowed. The answer's no, to this job, and to the other offer I got tonight. I glanced at Hartman, still parked in his chair. The one where I stay quiet and everybody wins. My mother turned to my father, opening the channel she had used for 40 years, the one where Frank clears his throat and restores order in her voice. And my father stood up, looked at his wife, and for the first time in my witness life, went off script. "Sandra, sit down." Quiet, not unkind, absolutely unprecedented. "Sit down and let the girl talk. I read that letter tonight because you told me she needed saving." He looked at me, and his chin shook. "Seems to me we ought to hear what she thinks needs saving in this room." My mother sat. The house itself seemed to lean in, and I turned to face the chairman. "Gerald." He straightened like a man called on in class. "Here's what happens now, and you can decide in front of the witnesses you performed for all evening." I kept my voice level, boardroom plain, no flourish, because the numbers were flourish enough. "Larkspur will extend Brightline's payment terms 90 days and keep the contract through the first quarter. 2 conditions. 1. The equity buy-in requirement on your new CEO disappears tonight. She doesn't wire $1. Ever. 2. An independent audit. A firm of my choosing. Full access. Books open to Madison by January 15th. She runs a real company with real numbers. Or you can explain to your board why your largest vendor sent a termination letter on December 26th, and why you sat at this table all night watching your board's problems get solved with her retirement account." I let it sit. "You have until the coffee's cold." Nobody breathed. Hartman looked around the table. At the aunts. At my father still on his feet. At the piano where the toast had been. A chairman discovering that a Christmas dinner had quietly become the most consequential board meeting of his year, with a hostile majority of 1. He picked his drink up off the floor, set it on the table, and said, "Agreed." Just that. Gray and small. And my sister. $600,000 a year. Corner office, Riverview. Made a sound I hadn't heard from her since we were kids, half hiccup, half sob, and walked out of the dining room into the kitchen, where her legs simply quit, and she slid down the cabinets to the floor and sat there on the tile, crying into her hands in her beautiful suit. I told you at the beginning. By the end of the night, my sister was on the kitchen floor crying, and it had nothing to do with anything I own. She was crying because somebody had finally stood between her and the people spending her. It had just never occurred to her that it would be me. I sat with Madison on the kitchen floor for a while. Some things you do in a suit, some things you do in an old sweater. Turns out this one works in both. And when her breathing evened out, I got my coat from the hired kid and walked out the front door into the snow. My mother followed me. Of course she did. But when she reached the driveway, she didn't perform. She just stood there in the porch light with her arms crossed against the cold, and when she finally spoke, the honey and the scalpel were both gone, and underneath them was an old woman from the wrong side of a butcher counter. "My father told me a butcher's girl shouldn't dream past the register," she said. "I spent 30 years selling houses to women who never once remembered my name." The snow ticked down between us. I thought if you girls had titles, the world couldn't do to you what it did to me. That's what I thought love was. Armor. It is the only true near apology I have ever heard from her, and standing there, I felt its weight and its limit at the same time. "That's the first true thing you've said to me in 11 years, I said. "Say it again sometime. Some night when you haven't just been caught." I got in the Honda and backed out, and in the mirror she got smaller and smaller under the porch light, still standing there when I turned the corner. Here's what I took home instead of the answer I came for. I got proof of how they treat someone with nothing. The price is that I'll never fully trust how they treat me now that I'm someone. I made that trade with my eyes open. I'd make it again. Here's what a year did. The audit took 11 weeks and read like a weather report from inside a hurricane. 3 years of numbers wearing makeup. Gerald Hartman resigned as chairman in February to pursue other commitments, which is board language for before the vote. Brightline shrank by nearly half. Stores closed, the Riverview office went, and what was left was a smaller, honest company that pays its invoices in 30 days. I know, because I still see them. Line 9 of a report I read every month. Madison stayed. The board that remained offered her the real job at real terms, and she took it at a lower salary and told me it was the first offer in her life she was certain she'd earned. Her $340,000 never left her account. Cole learned all of it in one long January night, and their marriage is its own story and not mine to tell. The Chestnut Street house never got listed. I bought it in the spring. Market price. A real closing. Paperwork straight as a pew, because Pearl Owens does not accept charity and I wasn't fool enough to offer any. She lives there still, and pays me rent of $1 a month, terms she dictated and I initialed. As for the ghost, the trade press got the story by March, the way they always do. Larkspur founder revealed. My town buzzed for about 2 weeks, and then Maple Falls did the wonderful thing small towns do, which is decide your news is old. The bookstore is still open Tuesday through Sunday. Mrs. Kowalski's grandson has moved on from dinosaurs to sharks, and my mother and I began the slow, unglamorous work of finding out what we are to each other when nobody is performing. This Christmas Eve, there were 6 of us at a table set for exactly 6. My parents, Pearl, Madison, and Cole, and me. No hired kid at the door, no place cards, and no titles under anybody's name. No toast reviewing the family's year, because we had all lived it and didn't need the shareholder version. My mother is still my mother. She started to tell the neighbors in November that her daughter was in logistics. Actually quite significant. Caught my eye across the yard, and stopped herself. And that clumsy little correction, repeated a dozen ways over a dozen months, is what change actually looks like at 63. It isn't a movie apology. It's a woman catching her own voice in the air and putting it down. Under the tree there was one box for me, small, wrapped in plain paper. Inside was a beat-up copy of A Tree Grows in Brooklyn, the same edition I'd checked out of the library over and over the year I was 12, the year she used to say reading wouldn't pay for anything. On the flyleaf she'd written, "You were right about what things cost. Love, Mom." At dinner, a neighbor stopped by with cookies, and my mother introduced me, and I watched her do it, watched her choose. This is my daughter Thea. She reads more than anyone I know. No title. No number. Just that. And then she squeezed my shoulder and went to get the coffee. Pearl caught my eye down the table and winked, slow as a lighthouse. Money is loud, she told this family once, and worth is quiet. This year, for the first time in my memory, my family finally lowered its voice, and I stopped hiding inside the hush. If the people you love only see you when you shine, the bravest thing you can do isn't hiding your light, and it isn't blinding them with it. It's standing in plain sight, at your full size, and letting them choose what to do with the view. That's my story. One dinner, one box with my name on it, and a signature I never gave. If someone at your table only measures you in titles and paychecks, let tonight be your sign to stop shrinking. Share this video with someone who needs it. Tell me your story in the comments. I read everyone. And hit subscribe, because there are more quiet women with loud stories where this came from. I'll see you in the next one.